They still called it a suicide mission, even before it began. 6 U.S. Navy SEALs were trapped inside a narrow canyon, the terrain as treacherous as stone traps buried in the earth thousands of years ago. Ammunition was down to just enough for a final stand. Enemy forces were closing in from 3 sides. Helicopters couldn't reach them, and the sky above was cold, as though it had swallowed every hope of retreat. The last radio signal came from the cave where they were holding out. The voice of Sergeant Dave Hammer, Evans rasped through the static. "We're done." But not far away, in the darkened cockpit of an A-10 Thunderbolt II grounded long ago, a female pilot sat motionless, listening to every word as if it were falling straight into her chest. Major Alicia Walker knew exactly what awaited her if she took off. A thunderstorm was sweeping across the Appalachian Range, radar was dead, every escape route closed. But she also knew what would happen if she didn't. 6 brothers would die. A quiet, cold death, unseen by anyone. No one ordered her, and no one could stop Alicia from flipping the power switch. The twin engines roared to life like a beast awakening. And then, against every regulation, she flew that aging aircraft straight into hell. And if this story moved you, make sure you've subscribed, because tomorrow I'll have something special just for you. If you've ever driven through a small town in southern Utah, the kind of place where even Google Maps sometimes loses its way, chances are you passed Hill Air Force Base without even knowing it. It isn't loud. There are no welcoming banners, and certainly no parades. It's simply a place where silent people do silent work, day after day, beneath the dry highland sky. In one corner of the administrative block, quiet as a shadow stretched long at sunset, sat a female pilot reading a book. Her name was Alicia Walker, Major, 34 years old, a combat pilot who had flown 117 missions, most of them in the Middle East. People still called her Harpy, a nickname both fearsome and never fully explained. Perhaps because anyone who had ever seen her handle an A-10 Warthog knew. Alicia didn't fly, she hunted. The problem was, she no longer flew. After one reckless decision, a sudden break from protocol to save a patrol team trapped near the Sierra Nevada, Alicia was suspended indefinitely. No court-martial, no medal, just a thick file sitting cold on the commander's desk, stamped in red, under review. Since then, she lived like a ghost at Hill. Not officially punished, yet not assigned anything either. Every morning she biked from the housing quarters to the hangar, down corridors full of eyes that carried equal parts gratitude and discomfort. She didn't blame them. A woman who had once been a legend, now reduced to paperwork. It created a strange kind of silence people called respect, mixed with distance. Her A-10 Gray Lady was also placed into long-term maintenance. It rested in the corner of the hangar, coated in metallic dust, like an old warhorse awaiting retirement. They said it was no longer fit for combat, but Alicia still walked past, quietly placing her hand on the rough fuselage, once caked with Iraq's sand, a habit no one could stop. These days, her mission was filling out technical forms. Once, she spent an entire morning determining whether a crack in the paint on an aircraft's body should be classified as significant damage. The answer was no, but it still required 3 pages of paperwork to say so. She became the main character in the base's afternoon gossip. I heard she once flew through a sandstorm to save an entire SEAL team. Yeah, and she's also the one who burned through $4 million taxpayer dollars in 40 minutes. Between those extremes, Alicia lived as though she needed neither side's validation. The only thing keeping her anchored was the sense that, if tomorrow someone needed her, she would still be here, still ready. Once, a young logistics officer fresh out of school saw her in the restroom polishing a smudge off her flight helmet. He hesitated, then asked, "Do you still hope to fly again?" Alicia didn't answer, but her hand never stopped moving, gentle, steady, as if each stain was a memory, and wiping it away wasn't to make it clean, but to remember. Some people are grounded for mistakes, others for fear. But Alicia Walker? She was grounded because she couldn't stand by and watch others die. And that, very possibly, might be the very thing that takes her back to the skies. Can you guess what happens next? Take a breath, drop a comment with the number 1 or I'm still here to keep listening. There is one thing often absent from a soldier's file, yet always present like a scar beneath the armor, memories no one permits, but which cling on persistent, as the smell of gunpowder lingering on a collar after every mission. For Alicia, that memory took the shape of the Nevada desert, and a sound she would never forget. The broken radio transmission of SEAL Team 9, fractured through static, tangled with gunfire, and voices blurred in panic. It was last summer, during an exercise that felt more real than war itself. They called it a simulation. But someone forgot that real war never asks if you're ready. According to the plan, Special Forces would infiltrate a 112-degree Fahrenheit desert zone to rescue hostages. Alicia was tasked with aerial patrol, forbidden from intervening. But when she saw the convoy veer off course, straying into a field of live mines leftovers forgotten to report from the weapons testing of the 1982nd, her heart clenched. She called command, no response. She called again, still silence. And so, instead of holding altitude and recording the incident per protocol, Alicia tilted the stick and dropped low, very low. The A-10 skimmed the desert floor like a hammer striking a saddle. She drove the men away from the danger zone with engine thunder and the smoke of flares. Not a single bullet fired. No one hurt. But there were consequences. 12 minutes after pulling them out of the blast zone, Alicia was ordered back to base. Suspension orders took effect almost immediately. They said she had exceeded authority, disrupted tactical information, and compromised the integrity of the chain of command. Cold accusations, written in formal language, leaving no space for what Alicia carried, the instinct to save lives. What hurt more was that the very men she saved never spoke up. Not out of ingratitude, but out of fear that the system would crush them the same way it had her. In the military, loyalty has form, but gratitude must stay hidden. From that day, she never mentioned it again. No explanation, no defense, not once. She didn't want to be made into a symbol of breaking orders for ideals. In truth, she only wanted silence and the chance to keep doing what was right, if given the chance. One rainy night, a former teammate left a small note wrapped around a silver seal pin inside her locker. No name, just a single line. We wouldn't have made it back that day. Alicia folded it away and never showed it to anyone. But from that moment, she began wearing a silver chain around her neck, not to display, but to remember. Someone still understood. To outsiders, Alicia might be a pilot, hard to control, a latent threat to the polished military order. But to those who had listened to final words over a radio, who had seen her eyes when a life was left behind, they knew she wasn't defying orders, she was refusing indifference. In the administrative room lit through the night, where hundreds of technical reports and training files were kept, there was one folder no one dared open for long. Inside was the detailed log of SEAL Team's final call from the Nevada desert. And if anyone had the patience to listen to the muffled tape all the way through, they would hear a faint voice at the 8th minute. Harpy is coming. Not just a report, but hope. All right then, before you settle in, take a few seconds to leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. That morning carried the smell of rain, not real rain, but the scent of wind drifting down from the northern mountains, as if nature itself sensed something was coming. Hill Air Force Base went on as usual. Coffee in the pot, indicator lights blinking across the control screens, the shuffle of paperwork and inspection orders cutting through the hum of the intercom. Everything was so normal. It was unsettling. Alicia walked into the technical room with a stack of files thick as a sandwich without filling. She meant to sit at her desk, open Excel, and input figures on engine rotation compatibility. But then the alarm sounded not loud, not shrill, just a repeating tone, enough for those battle-hardened to know something was wrong. She looked up at the large screen in the room. The map of eastern Tennessee appeared, the dense forest above the Appalachian ridges marked with a blinking red icon, Hell's Canyon, a jagged land of thick trees, where helicopters had gone missing, where artillery fire had once failed to penetrate the canopy. Beside the map, a line of text scrolled across the screen. SEAL Team 5. Lost contact. Engaged in firefight. Requesting air support. Alicia narrowed her eyes. That team name wasn't unfamiliar. Not at all. She stood, neither fast nor slow, as though her body had acted before her mind caught up. She strode down the familiar corridor, where her footsteps usually echoed through quiet afternoons. But this time, everything moved faster. The sound of her boots striking the tile was no longer presence, but warning. She went straight to the command center. Inside, the air was taut as an overstrung cord. Everyone's attention was fixed on a recording just pulled from the fractured radio signal of the SEALs before they dropped off the net. Bravo 5, we're done. The voice was ragged, like it came from a man wounded and lying in the mud, coughing as he fired. No explanation was needed. Alicia knew they were trapped, waiting for death, and no aircraft could reach them under current conditions. No aircraft, except hers. The operations chief looked up and saw Alicia. He started to speak, then stopped. Both of them knew the truth. She wasn't authorized to fly. She no longer held command authority. She wasn't allowed in the cockpit, not allowed to intervene, not allowed to do anything but wait for a casualty report. But no one in the room ordered her out. No one stopped her. And sometimes, the silence of a group was louder than any command. Alicia turned, walked out of the room, and headed straight for the hangar. The gray lady was still there, resting silent under fluorescent lights, as if untouched. But she knew. The engines had been tested last week. The cannon had been cleaned. The worn paint still scarred her skin. A beast? Ready, just waiting for someone with enough reason. She climbed the ladder, opened the cockpit, and for the first time in months, her hand touched the control stick like reuniting with a severed limb. Sudden, alive, unstoppable. Part of her still hesitated. This wasn't just about losing her career or facing charges. This was the final period. If she left the ground today and didn't return, everything she had ever believed in, held, sacrificed, would be buried in silence. But if she didn't take off, those 6 men would be buried together, with no one ever knowing how they had fought. In the cockpit, Alicia lowered her head over the switchboard. Lights blinked on row by row, like the aircraft's eyes opening after a long sleep. The startup sound wasn't loud, but to anyone who had flown an A-10, it was enough to mean the game was on. A veteran mechanic, working a few meters away on a tow vehicle, heard the engines rumble. He looked up, nearly dropping the coffee cup in his hand. He knew instantly who was in the plane. He knew exactly what was about to happen. But instead of running to report, he turned back to his toolbox, sighed, and muttered, "Well then, at least she'll get to fly one more time." The A-10 Gray Lady roared, lunging off the runway as if it too had been waiting far too long for this moment. The thunder of the GETF-34 engines shook across the Utah plateau, ripping apart the morning mist like a fist against the sky's chest. Straight wings, scarred fuselage, twin engines, it was no elegant aircraft. It was the last thing you would want to see if you were the one firing at American soldiers. Alicia dropped altitude faster than radar could track. All the electronic data began to stutter and dance. The weather was so severe that navigation systems flickered on and off like a disco party. But she didn't care. This wasn't a training run, and it wasn't a demonstration. She didn't need everything perfect, she only needed to get there. On the thermal screen, faint outlines appeared: 6 men huddled in a deep rock fissure in the forest. Signs of a desperate defense. Not far away, the heat signatures spiked enemy forces, numerous, organized, and clearly waiting. This wasn't a random ambush. It looked like a planned hunt. She knew what it meant. The SEAL team might have been lured into a trap. There might even be foreign drones watching. She wasn't authorized to be here. No one was authorized to be here. But sometimes, honor doesn't wait for authorization. Alicia pulled the stick. The A-10 dove like a hawk striking, its belly flashing like an old war scar. She aimed at the cluster of enemy fighters gathered along the mountainside. The press of the GAU-8, a Avenger cannon, thundered like the roar of a god. 30mm rounds tore through rock and earth, uprooting trees, the explosion of dust rising like a sandstorm. The enemy scattered, disoriented. A few heat signatures vanished from the screen. A narrow gap opened a short, bloody path. Just enough for a team to escape. Command had realized she was airborne. They called. They demanded. They threatened. But Alicia had shut off the comms. Not because she didn't hear, but because she had nothing left to say. At low altitude, the A-10 skimmed the treetops like a raging bull. A round clipped her left wing. Warnings flashed. She ignored them. She looped back, strafed again, clearing a second path. The forest shook, but this time the left engine began to lose pressure. The aircraft wobbled. She corrected. On the ground, the SEAL team began their retreat. Alicia clearly saw one man carrying a wounded comrade. 2 others fired as they dragged each other along. The heat signatures spread, moving slow, but advancing. She opened the emergency channel and spoke one line. Follow the smoke. Ahead, less than a mile away, lay an abandoned mining site, its open ground wide enough for a small transport plane to land. If she could hold fire long enough, they could reach it. The third pass came just as rain began to fall. Real rain, cold as steel. She lowered her visor, but her vision blurred by the second. The heavy mist seemed to swallow the aircraft into the mountain stone. An anti-air round sliced past the A-10's belly, hydraulic systems jolting with red warnings. Maybe this was the limit. Maybe no one would blame her if she turned back. But then she looked down and saw one SEAL stumble, fall. The others turned back to lift him. Leave no man behind, just as she had once refused to leave them. Somehow, Alicia kept the aircraft aloft, banking one final time over the treetops, unleashing a covering run. The last shells left the Avenger's barrel, carrying with them a promise. She would stay until the very last man got out. Do you know what's strangest about a battle without orders? It's that you don't know who you're fighting for, or what you're fighting for, until everything falls silent. In the cockpit now, Alicia had no radar. The main screen had gone black after a heavy jolt from an explosion near the left side. The warning system screamed like fire alarms in a nursing home. She couldn't reach anyone. No one was calling her. No one was answering. It was only her, and the beat of her heart pounding against her chest like an ancient war drum. On the ground, SEAL Team 5 was nearly at the quarry, the only viable landing zone left. Alicia had no more cannon rounds, no more missiles, no more shield. The A-10 had become nothing more than a flying iron frame, stripped bare, alone, yet it still held one last purpose: fly low, fly loud, fly terrifying, become a living decoy. She knew this with clarity. If she flew low enough, long enough, the enemy would reveal themselves, break formation, and aim at her. And then the SEALs could break through the last wall of fire. Alicia wasn't attacking. She was volunteering to be the target. She dropped altitude again, the lowest of the entire mission. The treetops brushed just feet beneath the plane's belly. Wind slashed against the canopy like blades. Leaves whipped across the cockpit in a pale blur. The engines wheezed like an old man with asthma. But the gray lady held her course. She glanced at the control panel numbers flickering like an old television losing signal. She switched on the cockpit voice recorder just to hear the sound of her own breathing. It was the sound of someone uncertain how much longer that breath would last. Then she laughed, not loudly, not long, a dry, brittle laugh like the irony of her own situation. They once called her arrogant, reckless, dangerous. But now, the most dangerous person on the battlefield was the one who hadn't fired a single shot, only used her own body as a shield for others. Every minute dragged like melted taffy in a microwave, hot, slow, impossible to swallow. Alicia circled above the SEAL team, drawing fire from three sides. She banked left, then right, each tilt exposing the aircraft's belly, daring the enemy to shoot. And they did. They shot. Hard. This time, she felt a crack from the fuselage. No more warnings. No more red lights. No more indicators at all. The aircraft shuddered like a beast on its last breath, and Alicia knew this was the end. She opened the cockpit recorder, not to broadcast a signal but to leave a trace. Just a few words. By habit, by instinct. But then, silence. She didn't speak. No final message, no brave farewell. Only her hand gripping the stick one last time, her eyes fixed through the haze of rain and dust where she saw the final silhouette of the SEALs reach the clearing. They were safe. And as if her body understood, the aircraft suddenly tilted. Alicia didn't fight it anymore. She released the control stick, gently, as though at last she could lay down the burden she had carried for so many years. The A-10 rolled, then slid along the ridge beyond, not exploding, not breaking apart, just disappearing, like an old bird that had finally finished its flight. Below, in the rain, 6 men stood silently, staring at the empty sky. No cheers, no applause, only silence. A silence so complete they could almost hear each man's heart whisper the same thing. She didn't leave before us. The news of Alicia's disappearance spread faster than any military bulletin ever had. Not because she was a high-ranking officer, nor a media name, but because for the first time the entire base people who had usually passed her by with lowered heads stood together in silence before an empty chair. The next morning, Hill Air Force Base issued no training alerts. No routine administrative reports. Instead, groups of soldiers gathered quietly, as if in church, gazing toward the horizon where the gray lady had taken off and never returned. In the small office where Alicia once sat filling out technical forms, someone had placed her flight helmet on the desk. The helmet found intact near the quarry, damp with earth and smoke, yet still clean, just as her hands had polished it each morning. No one wept aloud, but eyes were red. Each carried their own silence, and sometimes that silence spoke more than any polished tribute could. A week later, SEAL Team 5 returned to base. People expected a press conference, or at least an official statement, but they gave none. Instead, on Saturday night, 6 men in uniform walked straight into the small bar near the main gate, the kind of place soldiers went to unburden what words couldn't carry. They didn't order hard liquor, just 6 beers and one more, left unopened on the table, untouched. When the bartender asked curiously, "Someone running late?" one of them smiled faintly. "Number she got here before all of us." The military social networks quickly carried the story. Suspended pilot saves SEAL Team 5 with an old aircraft, then vanishes. The posts bore no names, no photos, but were filled with small recollections from all corners, like a former wingman recalling how Alicia once repaired a crack on the right wing herself just to keep the plane out of the hangar, or a young airman saying she once handed him a handkerchief when he trembled before his first night flight. The story became a symbol not only of courage but of a bitter truth. Sometimes it takes someone's sacrifice for us to realize we have been silent too long. 3 weeks later, at an internal Pentagon hearing, the colonel in charge of Western Air Operations apologized, not before cameras, not to the public, but by rising before his fellow officers, bowing his head, and saying, "I failed to see her when I should have." That apology didn't bring anyone back, but it did remove a line from Alicia's record. The words "indefinitely suspended from flight" were replaced with a simple phrase, "acted for the lives of her comrades." And then, one quiet Sunday, while the Appalachians lay shrouded in clouds as always, a search team found the downed. A-10 settled neatly between two ridges, nearly intact. No fire, no wreckage. And inside, the ejection seat had been used. There was no body, only a silver necklace, draped loosely over the control stick, the same necklace hung with the SEAL insignia given to her. That was all they found. The news swept across America. A female pilot, with no orders, no medal, flew into a death zone to save others, then disappeared. The story reached every television station. But unlike so many times before, this time no one argued. There was no debate of right or wrong, only reverence. The airfield at Hill AFB was renamed Walker Field. No grand ceremony, just a plain wooden sign beneath the American flag. Etched beneath it were the words, "She didn't fly because she was allowed. She flew because she couldn't stand and watch." And on every Memorial Day, at Dawn's flag ceremony, someone no one knows who still places an unopened can of beer at the base of the stone statue at the entrance. Nothing else. No flowers. No wreaths. Just one beer for the one who arrived before them all. There are people who leave before we ever get the chance to say thank you. Yet they leave behind a single, unshakable question in our hearts. If it were me, would I dare to do the right thing even if no one was watching? Alicia Walker's story is not just about courage. It is a reminder that sometimes the right thing comes without medals, without commendations, and yet it must still be done. Because somewhere, someone needs you to stand up. Even if it's just once. If you've ever known someone like her, someone who quietly sacrifices, who does good without asking for recognition, tell us their story. Leave a comment, share your experience, because we believe it is the simplest acts that make America the greatest. And if this story touched your heart, hit subscribe. Because here, we don't just tell stories about war, we tell stories about people.